I was starting to feel a bit disconnected, like the energy I was putting into my career wasn't being reciprocated in a way that was meaningful to my wife and I. But this our new baby, this rental house, became something that was part of us, and that
Nice.
resonated with us and made us want to do more.
So I'm taking an idea from Bigger Pockets. And yes, I am blatantly copying Bigger Pockets rookie podcast. One of the things I want to do with our school community is highlight people from the school community that are early in their journey. We're going to do a complete series on these. I likely will be recording these all on Sunday. Our first guy is Aaron. Aaron, how you doing, buddy?
I'm great, man. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Do me a favor, just introduce yourself to the audience. What say you? What do you do? Your experience, background, and we'll just get into a conversation.
Sure. I'll give you the quick highlights. So my name is Aaron Amin. I live in Houston, Texas here with my wife and three young kids. I have three kids under the age of three. So I have two 9-month-old twins and a 2.5-year-old daughter, keeping me busy. But I
Mm.
work full time by day as a management consultant. And in my moonlight hours, I've built a portfolio. We now have 8 rental properties, but we built that since 2019 across 3 states. So we started as local investors and we graduated to be long distance investors. And now, as you mentioned, kind of paying it forward and telling my story, some of the mistakes I made, and some of the things I wish I would maybe have done a little differently. I love sharing my story, with aspiring investors and people who are getting started.
Man, there's so much in there I want to unpack. The first one I want to unpack is the W 2. Obviously, I think that's my avatar, right? I talk to employees. I'm not the entrepreneur, rah guy, although you can certainly make that work. I think more people need to understand it's okay to be an employee. I know social media pushes the entrepreneur. I think Ed Milet says it all the time. Only 10% of people are entrepreneurs. So why push it? I think there's a lot to be said for, bust your ass 9 to 5, 9 to 6, whatever. And then, from 6 to 10, build your future. So, you start this journey in 2019, which means pre-kids, just by math. Talk about that. Talk about that initial leap, that initial deal in Texas, I guess.
Sure. Yeah. So we have lived kind of all over the place throughout my life. And also, my wife and I together have moved quite a few times. So when we started investing in real estate in 2019, we had been living in Vegas for almost 5 years at that point.
Hmm.
I worked in the entertainment industry for the first chapter of my career. And the entertainment industry is notoriously, you get overworked and not paid so great. And yeah, it's a pretty grueling endeavor. A lot of excitement, and it's something I was passionate about, especially in my 20s. But I realized, almost 10 years into my career, that I was putting so much in and not really planting a lot of long-term seeds for my own future. And it
Okay.
actually led to quite a bit of, emotional turmoil. And long story short, I kind of ran myself ragged and ended up in inpatient rehab for alcohol abuse.
Hmm.
And the reason I share that is because that kind of acted as a catalyst of like, hey, I can't keep putting all my energy and effort into something where, ultimately it's kind of driving me towards that behavior. And I'm not
Yeah.
blaming the career.
Detrimental. No, no, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's awesome.
so I use that as a catalyst to kind of wake up and say, hey, how are we going to plant some long-term seeds for our family?
Hmm.
I had just gotten married at that point. My wife very supportive of everything I was going through, but we also kind of said, hey, what kind of changes can we make that will set us up for the future? And we knew we wanted to have kids soon. So
Yeah.
real estate, you turned to real estate. We had owned a primary house at that time. We did the safest thing we possibly could have. We invested about a mile away from our house. We
Hmm.
we actually instead of getting a traditional wedding, which costs tens of thousands of dollars, we got married in our backyard. This is one of the benefits of being in Las Vegas. It
Hmm.
was $225 total, our wedding.
Nice.
$150 for the filing fees and $75 for the minister. And you just walk right down the street to they literally have a marriage bureau, which was
Wow.
about a mile from our house, and we got the certificate. But we
That's
took the
awesome.
money we would have spent on the wedding, and we bought our first rental. We played it safe. It was newly reconstructed from the ground up. We put 30% down, and we didn't know the first thing about how to underwrite a deal
Hmm.
or how to be a landlord or anything, but we kind of just used that as an experiment to figure it out. Luckily, things went well. We found a great tenant. who has actually in that house been with us ever since.
Oh, wow.
But now in hindsight, when I go back to rerun the numbers of what we did, 30% down, the rent we started at on paper, I would have rejected that deal at this
Mm.
chapter. So I'll kind of stop there because our story has evolved quite a bit since then, but that was the very beginning and the seed.
Well, I think there's so much in that. Again, to me, this journey starts with you and your wife being on the same page. Uh, as most of the journeys that I've seen, myself included, it starts with a sacrifice. You gave up the big wedding, even a medium wedding, for probably the cheapest wedding you could, right? Minister filing fee, and then you took that cash that would have been deployed for a party, a 1 day party, and bought an asset that you now own 5 or 6 years later. Um, Again, nothing that I talk about at one rental at a time is hard. It's just not sexy. Having a big wedding and a party with all your amazing friends, which I'm sure you had in the you could have thrown an event if you wanted. Um, it's not sexy, right? The party would have would have looked better on Instagram. But if you are trying to plant roots or a foundation that will take care of the family for decades, you gotta choose the unsexy, right? So I love that. And then kind of self-reflection. Um, looking at the deal now with the skill and knowledge and all of that, it's kind of interesting to say I wouldn't do that deal right now. But let's not get it twisted. That deal started you on this journey, and knowing what you knew then, I want to congratulate you. Right? Lots of people are interested, but you did something. You did it as conservatively as you could, right? You de-risked it by putting an extra 10% down a mile away. You know, I wish more new investors would kind of get to that point and go, oh, I guess we're committed now, honey. Let's try this thing. So kudos to you and the wife.
Thank you. There's one piece I want to pull out of that story too, right? So I said, oh, I wouldn't do it again based on my current, underwriting. But life is not lived in a spreadsheet, right? The spreadsheet
Right.
doesn't tell the full story. And one thing that came out of that was, first of all, when you buy your first property, you kind of have a little bit of a choice. It can be some afterthought that you tuck on a shelf somewhere and you only check on it, if stuff starts to go wrong and you don't really think of it like a business, or you can treat it as an opportunity to run it as a business and see how that feels to you. And like I said before, I was starting to feel a bit disconnected, like the energy I was putting into my career wasn't being reciprocated in a way that was meaningful to my wife and I. But this our new baby, this rental house, became something that was part of us, and that
Nice.
resonated with us and made us want to do more. And the agent that sold us that house, about 4 months later, he called us. We had a great transaction, and he did, he spent a lot of time educating us and just building a good relationship. But he called us about 4 months later and he said, hey, I know what kind of goals you guys have financially. I know you're, exploring and enjoying this real estate investor journey. I've got two houses. They're off market. They're these assisted living homes. So a company contracts directly with the owner.
Mhm.
They're 30% above market rent, and they're on 5-year leases with increasing rent. I know that
Mm.
was a bunch of numbers I just threw out, but basically these were, home run deals if ever there were any. And he just served them up to us on a spoon.
Mm.
And he gave us first shot at it, and it was expensive to get in. We had to figure out a couple kind of creative things to do where we sold basically all the stock we had at the time. We did a cash out refi on our primary. We said, come hell or high water, we're buying those two houses because just they're so compelling, and they're on these long-term leases with the potential for
Mhm.
30-year buy and hold level. And I think about something you've said a lot, which is if you buy four and only four houses and hold on to them for the long term, that's all you need to change your life. And within that 4 to 6 month period, we had gone from just owning our primary home and not thinking much about real estate to completely changing our identity and embracing this goal of being real estate investors, not just investing in real estate, but being real estate investors.
I love that. Yeah, assisted living 5 year basically it was a triple net deal with residential housing is kind of how I would phrase that. Is that fair?
Exactly. And the company had been around for 50 years and they've done this all over the country. There, no solvency issues, no legal issues that we could find in our due diligence. And so it's kind
Nice.
of one of those right place, right
Were you
time
were you able to get
things.
residential lending, or did you have to go commercial for those?
We were able to get residential lending. Yep.
So
In the state of
30-year
Nevada.
fixed.
Yep. In the state of
Nice.
Nevada, the way those homes were classified, it was not, treated as a quote unquote group home.
Okay.
The state laws allowed it to be operated. Yeah,
That's awesome.
perfectly
Yeah.
normally.
Yeah, I was a little nervous that that might have gone the commercial route and thus variable. But yeah, if you could lock in 30-year debt, I am curious, the both of these transactions were like 18, 19. Is that right?
2019, and then
Or
those two
early
closed
2020?
on January 2020.
All right. I'm curious. Obviously, rates crashed in 21, 22. Did you go back to the well and do a rate and term refi or something?
So we had 7 mortgage transactions in 2020. And so we had every single one of the properties we owned at that time, which was 5. We either did a cash out refi or refied into low rates. But we've
Nice.
bought since then too, and so we have some that are at slightly higher rates. So we bought some
Slightly
in,
higher rates, meaning like fours, fives.
well, the highest one 6.5. So
Oh,
we
that's
haven't.
that's not bad. Okay.
Yeah, we haven't crossed the 8 threshold, but we in 2022 we bought 3 houses and we were kind of chasing the
Yeah.
increases. So
Yeah. I got you. I got you. Well, next up, let's talk about being in 3 different markets. Obviously, that's something I have never done. I do think it can create a lack of focus. Also, I think it does increase risk because now you have 3 teams. And I've always said if the more teams you have, the more possibility of somebody ripping you off. So let's talk about the experience of being in 3 markets and talk about the kind of process and procedures you do to kind of protect yourself.
sure. So a topic I'm very passionate about as well, because like I said, the very first property we bought was a mile from our house. And right
Yeah.
now we live in Houston, Texas, where the only house we own is our primary. Our
Nice.
closest rental is now 1,000 miles away from us in Iowa. And our furthest rental is now 2,700 miles away in Washington State. But there's a
Wow.
reason we ended up in those 3 markets.
Hmm.
We lived in Las Vegas. So that was where we started our portfolio. We lived there
Makes
for five
perfect sense.
years.
Yep.
We have a lot of great friends there. We still self-manage those properties to this day.
Oh, wow.
And so we built a network of people that we could trust that could kind of be a first line of defense. That's a whole other can of worms we could talk about when we have more time, maybe. But we moved to Washington when COVID hit, which is where
Mm.
I'm from. So I'm from Seattle area, and
Okay.
I have family up in Washington State. And so we had again like kind of a personal connection there,
Yeah.
and we knew people. My parents have invested in real estate too, so we were able to leverage some of their connections and build a team there. That
Okay.
is actually the only market where we use a property manager right now, ironically.
Hmm. Okay.
Um, so those were kind of organic. Like we didn't, pull up a blank map and say, I want to invest in central Washington State. We lived there for a while. And so we were
I
able
like
to
it.
use this, live in a house, move out and rent it strategy. Great
Perfect.
way to get good financing. There's a number of benefits to that. But
Now,
the
just real quick
Iowa,
before you get to Iowa, I want to make sure people caught that last thing right. You moved to Iowa, or I'm sorry, you moved to Washington from Vegas. I'm guessing it was intentional, right? You bought something knowing that it would be a rental in a year or two. That was a plan from day one, right?
correct. And even further to that. So we moved to the Seattle area first. And we basically realized that if we wanted to afford a house in Seattle, we'd have to sell all 4 of our Vegas properties to get something that we would want. And we weren't willing to sell our rental properties to buy some expensive primary. So we
Okay.
rented for a while in Seattle. And then we decided when my employer, I had just switched into a new company. They gave me license to work remotely. And so we moved to Central Washington, which was more affordable,
Mhm.
bought a house there. And then, yeah,
Again, sacrifice, right? This journey is a 10-year journey. I know plenty of people, and I wrote about one of them in my book, who got 4 or 5 years deep. Life event happened. They sold the rentals to fund it. And now they're nowhere, right? Again, you had that option. You could have sold the 4 homes and had the dream Seattle pad. You're like, no, that doesn't fit our need. We're building something for the future. This do the work, this one rental at a time thing is not get rich quick, but it's get rich for sure. You just got to make some some sacrifices along the journey. So nice work.
Appreciate it. Yeah, I think again, it went along with that identity that we felt we were forming once we bought those other two houses. So we bought the one that was kind of a testing the waters. Then very shortly after we had the two more, all
Mm-hmm.
of a sudden it was part of our identity. And we said, what would, if I'm a real estate investor and I'm in this for the long haul, what would I do? Would I rent? Would I buy a house in Seattle for $900,000, or would I find a way to rent and figure it out and
Yeah,
keep paying down those mortgages and cash flowing on my Vegas rentals? So
I love it. Sorry, I cut you off about Iowa. How did we go to Iowa?
yeah, so this one was another kind of experiment, right? We had tested the waters. We liked the idea of being real estate investors. We had self-managed, in market. We had self-managed remotely, and we finally, I guess, worked up a little bit of courage to try a remote market. This was end of 2021, right when our daughter was on. She was My wife was 9 months pregnant, and we were both like running and gunning to like, how are we going to continue to expand before our
Mm-hmm.
financial circumstances change pretty dramatically? And so we said, there's no way we can afford, $150,000 down payments to invest in Washington. Vegas had already kind of run up like crazy in 2020. And so we started looking long distance at markets across the Midwest and the South. And long story short on those, I mean, we did kind of a top-down analysis, and this area called the Quad Cities in Iowa, where
Mm-hmm.
Iowa meets Illinois, popped out
Yep.
to us. You could get a
Nice.
nice, 3-bed, 2-bath house that's, in reasonable condition for about 120,000 and rent it for $1,300 to $1,400. The rates at that time were still low,
Mm-hmm.
and we were even kind of writing in some of the increases to the way we were underwriting, saying, hey, if the rate was,
Right.
at the time it was 3.5, if the rate was 5.5, would this still work? And we found stuff that was working. Uh,
Nice.
so so we There's a longer story here that we don't have time for, but the first one we closed on, we did the whole build a team ahead of time. We found an agent, we found a property manager, we found a local lender, and we closed on the property in January of 2022. And the whole situation with the property manager fell apart very quickly. They were kind of just, giving us the runaround with, they talked a big game, they had a plan, they told us what rent they thought we could get. They advertised it at that rent, and there was not a single bite or inquiry on it for about a month in the middle of the
Mm.
winter in Iowa. And then also it turned out that they hadn't been in the house during that entire month, and the gas was shut off, so there was no heat. So the house was sitting about 39 degrees. And basically, once we finally found all this stuff out, because we were new to the whole long distance investing thing,
Yeah.
not a whole lot we could do about it. I've had people ask me like, well, why didn't you fly out there and deal with that? So what am I going to, yeah, I can fly out there and go in the house, but eventually I'm going to have to go home,
Mm.
have a newborn daughter. So anyway, we were able to find a second property manager, quickly on our feet, thankfully, who came in and quickly stabilized the situation. And she found a tenant within 7 days. So it clearly was an issue of the
Same rent,
company, a
same expected rent, or a little bit lower?
little bit lower, but we had underwritten it, thankfully, a bit lower than what the guy said. And we were kind of
Mm.
just shooting for the gravy with what he
Yeah.
said.
Okay.
Um, but we were, that was us trying to do something bold and new, and try something untested for us. We had operated in markets where we had lived and we had a closer
Yeah.
pulse on. And this was something we kind of just academically researched and said, okay, we're gonna string it
Yeah.
together.
I love how you built what I think Bigger Pockets calls the core four. Something I'm big on is I don't know what I call it. I call it the fifth one. And actually, I got this from talking with Millennial Mike. I think it's most important for an investor, in this case, going to the Quad Cities, to find another investor already there and already quote unquote winning. Because you gotta there's got to be dozens of Quad City investors that probably live there and are killing it. If you could somehow tap into their network, you kind of de-risk it a little bit. What do you think of that?
I think I will never enter a market again without doing that first. I did it out
Awesome.
of order and I paid the price. I now know investors that are there, but
Yeah.
we were in a hurry. We kind of had
Yep.
this
You
artificial
had a compelling
deadline.
event. Yeah. Birth of a child. You can't make that go backwards.
Yeah, but at the same time, it's a good lesson not to rush into something. We would have been probably better served, taking our time and
I
finding
want I want the
investors.
audience to hear this, because this
Mhm.
part of talking to new investors is sharing the little scrapes and bumps and bruises that we capture. There's nothing wrong with the top-down analysis, looking across the country, out-of-state investing, but I think the core four is frankly too simplistic. It makes you, to me, the core four is like, hey, it makes me feel good, but you're not protecting yourself, right? You've got to invest in that fifth. And I think most important is that other investor network. And to your point, you got to do that first. You got to do that early,
Yeah,
because they will help in ways that you have no idea if you do it right.
100%. And I
Very,
think
very
too
cool.
that, we were able to turn that situation around, right? Like the other lesson there for us personally was it would have been really easy for us to just cut bait and
Yeah.
leave and sell that property,
Yeah.
39
Whoops.
degrees with
Yeah.
some
Yeah.
damage and just be like, wow, this was not a good idea. But we were grateful that we were able to find someone else who came in and helped us
Yeah.
stabilize it. And we ended up buying two more houses later
Oh,
that
that's
year,
nice.
right? So, and they
Yeah.
all cash flow. They're all, you know, we continue to learn and evolve instead
Right.
of run away. And there's
Yeah.
nothing wrong with either decision, but I think, that was a lesson for us.
Yeah, I was when early, I retire in 18. I start helping people. I was kind of probably anti out of state just because I heard more horror stories than help. But, Millennial Mike, other folks that I've talked to over the years, it really is possible. It really is doable, but it leans on, you got to get in a network of other people.
Yeah.
And that's where it starts. Again, I think people get distracted by what's called the core four. That doesn't help you at all, right? It actually
Yeah.
it introduces risk. So I love that. I know we
One
don't
of
have a lot of. Go ahead.
Yeah, one other thing, right? So multiple markets, multiple teams, 100%, there's more maintenance involved in
Mm,
that, and more relationships to keep and build. It's also a diversification, right? Like
sure.
our properties in Vegas. Vegas is a historically pretty volatile market. Quad Cities is the opposite. It's about as stable as it comes. For better or for worse.
Yeah.
You're not gonna get a
Yeah.
ton of appreciation or a bunch of decline. There was no pullback in 2022, 2023 in Quad
Yeah.
Cities, whereas in Vegas there was, upwards of 15% in
Yep.
some neighborhoods. And so there is something to be said for that, but I
Sure.
agree that like generally speaking, focus is going to serve you better, especially if you're really busy. And we're
Yeah.
learning that now because I think sometimes in our head we ask ourselves, is it worth being in three markets? And we do self-manage six out of the eight, you still, even from a distance. And there are definitely times when the kids are screaming and something's going wrong at a house where we're just like, do we want this? We can
Yeah.
do it, but do we want
Yeah.
to be doing it?
Is this filling our cup? Well, we only got a couple minutes. I want to hit one more thing, and you kind of just hit it. That's time management. You have a full-time demanding job. You have three kids under three. You have a portfolio in 3 states with two different teams. You're self-managing some of those. How the heck do you do it? Do you have a day stretcher?
Well, when the twins were infants, it was pretty hard to stick to what I was doing prior, but I prescribe to the same philosophy you do, right? Which is just be consistent, block out that 20-minute per day time and find different ways to fill it that are meaningful. I actually have I've tried to map out what this system looks like, and I use a 14-day planner, and I say if my strategy is kind of there's offense activities and defense activities. Offense is things that grow your business, so networking, analyzing deals, staying on top of market trends, whatever it is to potentially grow. And defense is what operates your business. So doing your bookkeeping, updating your systems and processes, doing your check-ins with your property managers. And so I do try and kind of map out, like looking ahead, what are some things I can do to continue to keep my portfolio moving forward. And, it never plays out perfectly like that. But I think just identifying like what's one thing I can do today that will have some degree of impact on my business, and how can I also eliminate things that don't? I
Yeah.
mean, those are two questions. If you wake up asking yourself every day, chances are you'll keep moving forward. Elimination is not my strong suit, but I would say that, every time you sit down and think about it, is this actually something that's going to move my business forward?
Well, Aaron, this is an amazing story. Thank you for sharing it. Thank you for being a part of our school community. If somebody wanted to follow you, how would they do that?
Sure. I'm on pretty much all social media, just my first and last name, Aaron Amin. You can also find me at aaronamin.com. I do have a lot of free resources that kind of pay it forward and share some of the mistakes from my journey. And I have a couple courses on long distance investing and what's worked for me. Would
Love
love
it.
to chat with anyone.
Awesome, folks. And if you are a part of school community, reach out to Aaron. Let him know how awesome he did. Thanks, buddy. Appreciate you.